Welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. I spent quite a long time getting ready for this video here, and I've got it broken down in systematic order. I think this is probably the greatest piece of proof, the greatest lineup of proof that I've ever devised, and I think that any Christian has ever conceived of in 2,000 years. And I've never, ever heard this presented by any other fellow Christian. And I am firmly convinced that with all these Tanakh verses, and I don't have one verse from the New Testament, all of these verses here are from the Tanakh, about 10 or 11 of them. By going through these verses, the singular little tiny verses, systematically you will see that Jesus is the Messiah. There will be no denial. And quite simply, anybody who believes the Tanakh, any Jewish soul, anybody who hears this proof, there's no way that you could deny it. Let's start with Numbers 24:17, a verse that Judaism affirms is about the Messiah. In Numbers 24:17, it says the following. It says, I see it, but not now. I behold it, but not near. A star has proceeded from Jacob, and a scepter has risen from Israel. Right there, we hear the first word, star. A lot of people, I haven't heard anybody bring this up. But the fact is, it calls Messiah a star. I'll move on and I'll get back to that in a second here. But just remember, Numbers 24:17, which Judaism says is about Messiah, identifies Messiah symbolically with the term star. In the Bible, in the Tanakh, for example, Judges 5:19, around those verses, we know that in the Tanakh, star is symbolic for heavenly messengers. So anyways, this Numbers 24:17, I see it but not now, I behold it but not near, a star has proceeded from Jacob, and a scepter has risen from Israel. The next verse I'm going to read is Daniel chapter 7, reading from verse 13. This again is another verse that is, according to Judaism, messianic. It is about the Messiah. And it says, I was seeing in the visions of the night, and lo, with the clouds of the heavens, as the Son of Man was one coming, and unto the Ancient of Days he is come, and before him they have brought him near. And to him, and this is where we know it is the Messiah. It says, and to him is given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages do serve him. And all peoples, nations, and languages do serve him. His dominion is a dominion age during that passeth not away, in his kingdom that which is not destroyed. It is an eternal, prosperous kingdom. Okay? So that is Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. And what have we learned from these two verses so far? Numbers 24 showed us that God has allowed, through the prophet Balaam, for Messiah to be called a star, which, according to Tanakh, can symbolize a heavenly messenger. Well, we know Messiah is not a star. He's not a sun burning up in the sky. So obviously it's symbolic for the fact that he could be a heavenly messenger. But we would need to see more evidence of that. So in Daniel 7, like I read, we see, just pointing out, Messiah coming down from the heavens. But that's not the great piece of proof. However, it does say, this is the important part, in verse 14, that he has an eternal kingdom. Okay? So if we go over now to the next verse that I have ready. Now this verse is not claimed in Judaism to be about Messiah. However, considering what I have just read, Daniel 7, this figure who comes down from the heavens, a son of man, he has an eternal kingdom. Okay? In Isaiah 9, verse 6 and 7, it says the following about this figure. Okay? It says, "For a child has been born to us, a son has been given to us, and the princely power is on his shoulder. And he does call his name Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty Warrior, Father of Eternity," or Eternal Ruler, "Prince of Peace. To the increase of the princely power and of peace there is no end, on the throne of David and on his kingdom, to establish it, to support it in judgment and righteousness, henceforth even unto the age." The zeal of Hashem does this. Now, of all the things mentioned there, the important things to focus on are the following. Number one, it says that he has an eternal kingdom. It says here in verse 7, "And of peace there is no end, on the throne of David and on his kingdom, to establish it and to support it in judgment and in righteousness, henceforth even unto the age." The zeal of Hashem of hosts does this. To the increase of the princely power and of peace there is no end. So he has an eternal princely power. Whoever this figure is, whoever it may be, he has an eternal princely power in a kingdom which will never go away. These are the exact same terms used to describe the Messiah from Daniel chapter 7. Chapter 7 said Messiah will come down from the heavens and that he would have an eternal lasting kingdom. This is at the end of the times. In Isaiah 9, whoever it may be speaking about just happens to also have an eternal kingdom. And we know, and I'm getting to this later, through progressive, systematically in progression, okay, but we know that Messiah is the prince, even according to Judaism. And it says here, to the increase of the princely power, it calls him the Prince of Peace, okay? Now, moving on, this is where it becomes quite profound. We're going to go over to Judges 13, verse 17 next. I'm going to read from verse 16 to help introduce a little bit of context. It says, "And the messenger of Hashem," this is a heavenly messenger who has come down to the earth. It says, "And the messenger of Hashem saith unto Manoah, If thou dost detain me, I do not eat of thy bread, and if thou prepare a burnt offering to Hashem, thou dost offer it. For Manoah has not known that he is a messenger of Hashem. Manoah saith unto the messenger of Hashem, What is thy name? When the words came to pass, then we have honored thee. And the messenger of Hashem saith to him, Why is this thou dost ask for my name? And it is Wonderful." So what we can see established here in Tanakh is whoever this messenger may be, irregardless of that for now, but we see a heavenly messenger whose name is Wonderful. The angel himself has said, "What is my name? It is Wonderful." Now this is the exact same name given to the figure in Isaiah 9. It says here, "A child has been born to us, and he does call his name Wonderful." Now if you search the Tanakh, like I did, for the term wonderful, it only occurs a certain number of times. I went through every single one. The only places in Tanakh that have that term as a name, are Isaiah 9 and Judges 13. Clearly, we can see the connection here. So far, Numbers 24, we see that Messiah is called a star, which is a heavenly messenger. In Daniel 7, we see the Messiah coming down from the heavens as if he was a messenger. After all, that's where they're from. And it says that he has an eternal kingdom. In Isaiah 9, it says that this figure, who is called Wonderful, has an eternal kingdom and all the princely titles, Prince of Peace, princely power. And in Judges 13, we see that a heavenly messenger, whoever it may be, his name is Wonderful. Now moving on, we go to Psalm 118 next. We'll go to verse 17. Actually, I'll read from verse 16 to help introduce it a bit. It says, "The right hand of Hashem is exalted. The right hand of Hashem is doing valiantly. I do not die, but live, and recount the works of Jah. Jah has sorely chastened me, and to death has not given me up. Open ye to me gates of righteousness, I enter into them. I thank Jah. This is the gate to Hashem. The righteous enter into it. I thank thee, for thou hast answered me, and art to me for salvation. A stone the builders refused has become head of a corner. From Hashem has this been. It is wonderful in our eyes. This is the day Hashem has made. We rejoice and are glad in it. So what can we observe here in Psalm 118? Again, we see the term wonderful. What it actually says is the following. It introduces in verse 20, this. It's introducing a subject. It says this, the subject, is the gate to Hashem. So this subject X is the gate to Hashem, and this gate is where the righteous enter in. And it says, art to me for salvation. And it identifies in verse 22, the gate is a stone the builders refused has become head of a corner. And in the next verse, the it is identifying that same subject, which is the gate of salvation, which is the stone that was rejected. Verse 23, it says it, the same subject, that one, it says it is wonderful in our eyes. Is this a mere play on words? I don't think so. I don't even have to use, I could have left Psalm 118 out of this. But I think we can see the relevance here. Moving on. In Joshua 5:13, it says, well, this is where Joshua meets again another messenger of God. It says, and it cometh to pass in Joshua's being by Jericho, that he lifteth up his eyes and looketh, and lo, one standing over against him, and his drawn sword in hand. And Joshua goeth unto him, and he saith to him, art thou for us or for our adversaries? And he, the messenger, says, no, for I am prince of Hashem's host. Now I have come. And Joshua falleth on his face to the earth, and does obeisance, and saith to him, what is my Lord speaking unto his servant? And the prince of Hashem's host saith unto Joshua, cast off thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place on which thou art standing is holy. And Joshua does so. So what can we divulge from Joshua 5? We see a heavenly messenger, who he might be. We won't argue about that now, but we see a heavenly messenger who has identified himself as the prince of God's host. He is the prince over all the host. Now remember that term, prince of the host. Next we're going to go to Daniel chapter 8, and we'll start reading from verse 8 to introduce context. And it says, and the young he-goat, which is talking about Greece, has exerted itself very much, and when it's strong, broken has been the great horn. And come up does a vision of 4 in its place, at the 4 winds of the heavens. And from the one of them come forth as a little horn, and it exerteth itself greatly towards the south, and towards the east, and towards the beauteous land. Yea, it exerteth unto the host of the heavens, to the messengers, and causeth to fall to the earth of the host, and of the stars, and trampleth them down. Verse 11, and unto the prince of the host it exerteth itself, and by it taken away has been the continual sacrifice, and thrown down the base of his sanctuary. So from right there we can see, again, the same term, prince of the host. In fact, if you search the Tanakh, that term only occurs twice in these 2 verses that I've read. Clearly, there's only one prince of the host. The prince of the host talked about in Joshua is the same prince of the host talked about in Daniel here. Now, pay attention to the fact that the term prince is used. Okay? Next, we're going to go a little bit lower down in the same chapter. So Daniel 8, verse 22. It's talking about the exact same figure. Okay? It's talking about the exact same figure. Why? Because what I just read talked about Greece being broken up into the 4 latter kingdoms, and then from them came one little evil king. He exerted himself against the prince of the host. And if we go look here in Daniel 8, starting with 22, it's the exact same prophecy being told from a different perspective. Verse 22, and that being broken, stand up do 4 in its place. 4 kingdoms from the nation do stand up, and not in its power. And in the latter end of their kingdom, about the perfecting of the transgressors, stand up does a king, fierce of face and understanding hidden things, and his power has been mighty, and not by his own power, and wonderful things he destroyeth. A little ironic the word wonderful is there, just want to mention that. And wonderful things he destroyeth, and he has prospered and wrought and destroyed mighty ones, and the people of the holy ones. And by his understanding he also caused deceit to prosper in his hand, and in his heart he exerteth himself, and by ease he destroyeth many. And against the prince of princes he standeth, and without hand he is broken. Now, there's something very important here. Like I said, Daniel 8, verses 8 through 11, clearly was speaking about the breaking up of Greece into the latter 4 kingdoms, and the evil king who would exert himself against the prince of the host. And we see here in verse 22, the exact same scene, the kingdom being broken up, 4 stand in its place. Then the evil king rises up, and what does it say he does? It says that he stands against the prince of princes. So clearly, there's no argument here. It's the same story from a different perspective, and this shows you that the prince of the host is the prince of princes. That is inarguable. It's the same one king exerting himself against the same one prince. Okay? Now, very quickly in Ezekiel 34:24, it says, and I, Hashem, talking about the latter days, the end of times, and Judaism will agree with this one here. It says, and I, Hashem, I am their God, and my servant David is prince in their midst. I, Hashem, have spoken. And again, in Ezekiel 37:25, and they have dwelt on the land that I gave to my servant to Jacob, in which your fathers have dwelt. They have dwelt on it, they and their sons sons unto the age. And David, my servant, is their prince to the age. So it's quite clear that Messiah is the prince. And if we go back and look through everything that I've shown here, Numbers 24, Messiah is called a star, which is the symbol for a heavenly messenger. In Daniel 7, Messiah comes down from the heavens as if he were a heavenly messenger, and he has an eternal kingdom. In Isaiah 9, it says that the figure being spoken of has an eternal kingdom. Clearly, that is one the same. So the figure in Isaiah 9 must be the Messiah, because the only person on this earth who will have an eternal kingdom is the Messiah. Isaiah 9 also says that this one has the title, the name of Wonderful, and that he is a prince because he is called the Prince of Peace. The only other figure in the entire Tanakh with the name Wonderful is the angel from Judges 13, which was the next verse that I read. This establishes concretely that the Messiah is a heavenly messenger, just from those 3 verses alone. And Messiah's name is Wonderful. And in Psalm 118, it said that the gate of salvation that the righteous go through to reach God is also the cornerstone that was rejected. And this one is called Wonderful. It actually says that. And in Joshua 5, we see that a heavenly messenger is called, he identifies himself as the prince of the host. In Daniel 8, we see, again, the prince of the host, and an earthly king goes against him. Since when did an earthly king fight against a heavenly being? Except with Jesus. Later in Daniel 8, it said the same figure who was the Prince of Hosts is also the Prince of Princes. And we know from Ezekiel, like I've already said, Messiah is the Prince. That right there proves Messiah is a heavenly messenger. That is why he was called the star. He will come down and create an eternal kingdom at the end of the days. His name is wonderful. He is the Prince of Peace. He is the Prince over all of God's host in the heavens. He is the Prince of Princes. Why would he be called the Prince of Princes? That means you're the greatest prince, the highest prince. And remember, the Prince of Princes is the Prince of the host. That's how we know that Jesus was definitely the Messiah. And what's even more astonishing is that in Daniel, the evil king who presses himself against the Messiah, against the Prince of Princes, it says, without hand he is broken. We know that the king who went against Jesus to get him killed, that king himself died without hand, as history recorded. Is that a mere coincidence as well? But that's immaterial to the rest of this. This concretely proves that Jesus was the Messiah, hands down. I don't even have to get into the prophecy of Daniel or anything else. I could just leave it right like this. There's never been a presentation like this from any Jew or Christian in 2,000 years. I've never heard it, and if it's out there, I've just never heard it. I think this is impossible for anybody, and even the greatest rabbi. I don't see how they could get away from this one here. 1 second. Anyways, that's food for thought, folks. Take care.